In this lesson, we're going to look at another fun topic, and this one is about how to implement pattern matching with creating an unapply method. So as I note here in the problem statement, the problem is that you want to create an unapply method for a class so you can extract its fields in a match expression. And really what that means is that you want to be able to use your custom class inside of a match expression. And the way you solve that problem is you write an unapply method in the companion object of your class, and the method has to have the proper return signature. So what I do here in the cookbook is I show this in two steps. First, I show how to write an unapply method that returns a simple string. And then in the second part, I show how to write an unapply method that really will work in a match expression here. And before we do that, I want to note that if unapply sounds familiar, that's because earlier in the cookbook and also earlier in my videos, I showed how to write apply methods. So that is here in lesson 7.5. This is in the Scala cookbook, if I didn't mention that. So one recipe in the Scala cookbook is how to use apply methods in objects as constructors. So I've covered this in previous videos, so I'm not going to get into it more. But I'll just say right here is one example of creating an apply method, and that creates a constructor for the person class. And then you use it like this. So if you're not familiar with apply methods, you can go ahead and pause the video and read this text right here and see how that works. But because I've already covered this in other videos, I'm going to go back to unapply methods. So that is recipe 7.8. So again, the first step is writing an unapply method that returns a string. So I'm going to move things around here just a little bit. All right, so I move things around. So we have the text of the Scala cookbook over here. We have an IDE running up here. And then I have Scala CLI running with the watch option right here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and start creating an unapply method for a person class. And this one will just return a string. So the way this starts is we create a person class. And that person class will have two fields in its constructor. One is the name, which is a string, and then the second one is age, which is an int. And now what we do is we create a companion object for that person class. And recall the companion object is just an object that's in the same file and has the same name as your class. So in this case, the class is person. So the companion object is person. And similarly, we talk about the person class as being the companion class for the object. So the key is that they have the same name and they're in the same file. And now what I want to do is just create an unapply method. And this is going to take a person as an instance, and then it's going to deconstruct that person into a string. So this is actually very similar to JSON when you're doing serialization and deserialization. So now we're going to take a person here as input, and we're going to return that as a string in this first step. So now the string will just be an interpolated string. And I just want to return the name there, and then the age here. So that's all we have to do for that. And now I just want to create a person. So P equals new person. And I'll create that for Lori and her age of 33. And what I do in the book here is I show how to unapply that and then assign that to a variable. And all I'm going to do differently here is just print line that. So I'll scoot that over and say person dot unapply and then pass in that P instance right there. So I'm going to print that. So when I press save, you'll see that output right down here. So far, so good. And right down here, I note that unapply deconstructs the person instance, as I just mentioned. So it's deconstructing it into a string representation, and the string representation can be anything we want right now. And technically, this is said that we've created an extractor method because we're creating this way to extract fields out of an object as we just did right here. So now that we've seen how to write an unapply method that returns a string, I want to show how to write an unapply method that works with a match expression. And to show what I mean, I guess the first thing I need to do is show how that fails. So if we try to use this person object in a match expression, that's what I'm doing in this code down here. So we could say, what do I have there? Deconstructed person equals, and then we'll do p match. I'm going to skip that string part for right now and just say that I have this person right here, that person object right there, and I'm going to try to deconstruct that. So the way we could do this when things work is say that I have a person and it's going to have these two fields, name and age, which I'm just calling N and A right here. And then inside of a match expression, you can deconstruct that. So I'm going to turn this into a string, and this string will say it's going to look like that and that right there. So that's the way I want that to work. In the book, I don't remember why I showed null right there, but what I'll do here is just say for any other instance, we'll turn that into a string and just say that's something else. So now when I save that, we are going to see an error message down here. And that message is string is not a valid result type of unapply method when used in an extractor. So what that's trying to say is that you cannot use a string here as the extractor when you're trying to use that in the match expression. That just doesn't work. So what happens that I describe over here is that when you want to use a custom object like this inside of a match expression, unapply needs to return a specific type. So what goes on is if your class has one parameter and its type is A, then you're going to want to return an option of A, which is going to be your parameter value wrapped inside of a sum. Now, in our case, our class here has two parameters, name and age, so we'll fall into the second category. And it says when your class has multiple parameters, you want to return them in an option. And then this is interesting here because that's the option with that left bracket right there. And then the values inside of here are actually returned inside of a tuple. And that's what it means when you have that opening parenthesis there and the closing parenthesis there, is that all of your values are going to be inside of a tuple. And then you're going to wrap that in a sum. So just to show what I mean, let's come back over here. And we're going to get rid of that code because that does not apply anymore. And now, again, remember that we're working on this part right here. So this is going to be an option. And as I mentioned, this is going to be a tuple inside of here. So we're going to return name and age. So name is a string and age is going to be an int. So that's the return type for unapply when we want it to work inside of a match expression like this. And now all we have to do to make that work is just say, well, I want to return sum, and that's going to be p.name, and then that's going to be p.age, like that. And that's really all you have to do to make that work. So if that sounded complicated over there, that is all you have to do to make that work. And actually, that's close. I think I'm off by with parenthesis there in the book, aren't I? I think it needs to be like that. So this is going to be a sum, and then that's going to be a tuple inside of a sum. So I'm going to separate that so we can see that better, and then I'll save that. And I'm not seeing any output here because I'm not printing any output here. So let's print line that deconstructed person. And there we go. So now we get name colon Lori, age colon 33, and that's coming from this string right here. So now this deconstruction process is working properly. So we start with person, and then we say we want to match on that person type. And then in this first line, I am deconstructing a person. I'm taking the fields out of that. I'm taking the name and age fields out of that, and then I'm using those inside the string over here. And this process works now because of this unapply method, and specifically because I have the correct type right here, and then I'm doing the correct thing inside of here, which I wasn't doing just a few moments ago. So now this lets me deconstruct a person. And if we come back over here to the book, I just had a few more points inside of here. So one point is that case classes generate this code for you automatically. But if you don't want to use a case class and you just want to create a normal class like I show right here, then you'll have to create the unapply method yourself. And you see it isn't too hard to write by hand. And I know some developers, when they want to create a type like this, and the only thing they want is an unapply method, then they'll write this manually instead of creating a case class. Because a case class generates so many other things for you, they may just create an unapply method, as I just showed right here. As I mentioned earlier, the apply methods in companion objects are basically the opposite of this. They're used to construct new instances. And if you ever run into any problems, come and check out the official Scala page on extractor objects for more details on how to write unapply methods. And that page will look something like this, and they show examples similar to what I just talked about. And then down here at the bottom, they show the rules that I just talked about. So if you're returning a single value, return that as an option of t. If you're returning several subvalues, do what I just did in our example over here. And then there's another rule here. When the number of values to extract isn't fixed and you want to return an arbitrary number of values, then just follow the instructions that they have here for creating an unapply seek method, as I mentioned right there. In summary, whenever you want to create a custom class like this person class over here, and you want to use that class inside of a match expression like this, then what you need to do is write an unapply method. And that's what we just covered in this video lesson.